Today, we are diving deep into a nearly 2,000-year-old legal text to solve some really high-stakes puzzles. We're going to see how this incredibly detailed ancient system deals with something we all face. What do you do when things get messy? You know, when perfection just isn't an option, and you have to make a tough call with a lot of uncertainty. Let's get into it.
Okay, so imagine this. You're a priest in the ancient temple in Jerusalem. Your whole world is about precision, purity, following the rules to a T, and then, whoops, an accident happens. Something totally sacred gets mixed with something impure. You can't just toss it out. It's holy, but you can't use it either. So what do you do? And this wasn't just a thought experiment. For them, this was a real, serious problem.
All right, so to really get the solutions, we first need to understand the basic rules of the game here. In the world of temple sacrifice, ritual purity is absolutely everything. A sacrifice is only valid if it checks a whole bunch of very specific boxes. So you can imagine, when things get mixed up, it creates this huge legal and spiritual headache.
At the very heart of our first puzzle are two kinds of sacrificial blood. You've got your valid blood, which comes from perfect, unblemished animals. This is the good stuff, what you need for the altar. And then you've got invalid blood from blemished animals. This stuff is a total no-go, strictly forbidden. One is sacred, the other is basically a contaminant. Now, the simplest case, it's pretty straightforward. If you mix these two blood types in the same cup, the rule is crystal clear. The whole thing is disqualified. You pour it right down the temple drain, the contamination is direct, it's total. Case closed. But what happens when the problem gets a little trickier than that?
And this is where we hit our first major dilemma. We're shifting gears now from a problem of direct contamination to a problem of uncertainty. This is where the real legal genius starts to shine. The question is no longer, is it mixed? The question is, wait, which one is the mixed one?
So just picture it. You have a whole bunch of identical cups with valid blood, but one cup of invalid blood has gotten lost among them. You have no idea which is which. Two main opinions pop up. On one side, you've got Rabbi Eliezer, who offers this really practical solution. He says, look, if a priest accidentally uses one of the cups, you can just assume it was the bad one, the action resolves the doubt, and the rest of the cups are good to go. But the sages, the majority, they take a much stricter line. For them, that doubt taints the whole set. Until you know for sure, nothing can be used. Rabbi Eliezer's logic here is just fascinating. He's basically creating a legal assumption after the fact. He's saying, since something already happened while we were unsure, let's use that action to clear up the uncertainty in the best way possible, so the temple service can keep going. It's a really clever way to stop the whole system from grinding to a halt over one little mistake.
But believe me, the puzzles get even harder. The next one isn't just about whether something is valid or not. It's about being told to do two things that are mutually exclusive, that you just physically cannot do at the same time. How in the world can you follow the rules when the rules themselves seem to crash into each other?
So here's the setup. The temple altar had this red line painted around the middle of it. Some sacrifices required the blood to be placed above that line. Others needed it placed below the line. So what happens if you accidentally mix those two types of blood in the same cup? You can't put the mixture both above and below the line at the same time. It's a total paradox.
And this is just a brilliant example of Rabbi Eliezer's creative thinking. He comes up with this two-step solution. First, he says you place the mixture above the line. And in that moment, you legally say that the below blood in the mix is basically inert, as if it's just water. Boom, you've fulfilled the above requirement. Then you take what's left and you place it below the line, fulfilling the second requirement. He solves a physical impossibility with a genius legal fiction.
All right, the next dilemma really gets to the core of this whole legal debate, and it's a little more abstract. So you have blood from one sacrifice that needs to be put on the altar just once, but it gets mixed with blood from another sacrifice that needs 4 separate placements. The big question is, how many times do you apply the mixture? 1 time or 4 times?
This question sets up the main event, a clash between two intellectual heavyweights. Rabbi Eliezer says you have to do 4 placements. His thinking is, hey, if you do 4, you've definitely done the one that was required. Better to do too much than not enough, right? But Rabbi Yehoshua totally disagrees. He says you should only do 1 placement. For him, doing less is actually the safer option, and we're about to find out why.
So, why the big disagreement? It's not just a matter of personal opinion. They are both building their arguments on fundamental commandments right out of the Torah. This is where we get to see the bedrock legal principles bubble up to the surface in this really dramatic exchange.
Rabbi Eliezer fires the first shot. He says to Rabbi Yehoshua, hey, by only doing one placement, you failed to do the 4 that were required for the other offering. He argues this violates the biblical law of Bal Tigra, which means do not diminish from the commandments. For Rabbi Eliezer, the most important thing is making sure you don't fall short of what God commanded.
But Rabbi Yehoshua has this killer comeback. He fires right back, saying that by doing 4 placements, Rabbi Eliezer is adding 3 extra actions to the offering that only needed 1. And that, he says, violates the other side of that same coin, the law of Bal Tosif, or do not add. So now they're stuck. It seems like no matter what you do, you're breaking a biblical law.
And this is where the argument gets incredibly deep. First, they both kind of try to get out of it by arguing that maybe these rules don't even apply to mixtures at all. But then Rabbi Yehoshua delivers the knockout punch. He points out that to add, you have to physically do something extra. It's an active violation. But to diminish, you just don't do something. It's passive. And in Jewish law, actively breaking a rule is considered worse than passively failing to do something. So it's better to do 1 placement and passively diminish than to do 4 and actively add.
What's so amazing is that the story doesn't just stop there. For hundreds of years, later scholars in the Gemara, that's the huge commentary on all this, they didn't just accept the conclusion. They basically tried to reverse engineer the logic to figure out the deep-seated assumptions that led each of these sages to their original opinion. And to do this, they bring in a new test case. Imagine a flask of special purification water. A little bit of regular water falls in, diluting it. Rabbi Eliezer, being consistent, says you can still use it, but you have to sprinkle it twice. So the question for these later scholars was, why twice? What does that tell us about what he really believed?
This one little detail, why twice, becomes the key to unlocking his entire worldview. Was he thinking about physics? Like, do the water molecules actually mix? Or was this about legal definitions, like you need a minimum amount of the special water in each sprinkle? Figuring out the why behind the twice would reveal everything.
The later sages came up with these brilliant theories. So Reish Lakish suggested that Rabbi Eliezer thought the waters do mix, and you need a minimum dose. In a 50-50 mix, you sprinkle twice, just to make sure you deliver 1 full dose of the good stuff. Then there's Rava. He agreed the waters mix, but he thought 1 sprinkle was technically enough. The second one was more like a penalty to discourage being careless. And finally, Rav Ashi proposed something completely different. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer believed the waters don't mix at all. In that case, you'd have to sprinkle twice just in case your first sprinkle was only regular water. 3 totally different, logical explanations, all trying to get inside the head of a sage from centuries before.
And that brings us to the most important takeaway of all. The Talmud isn't just a rule book, it's a record of the argument itself. The process, the debate, all the different layers of reasoning, that's the point. It doesn't just give you the final answer, it shows you the entire intellectual journey, with all the disagreements and open questions included.
And you know, this ancient debate leaves us with questions that are just as relevant today, whether you're in law or science or just making decisions in your own life. When you're dealing with incomplete information, how much certainty is really enough to make a move? And when following the rules to the letter leads to an impossible situation, what kind of creative solutions, what kinds of legal fictions can we come up with to find a way forward?